So far we've been looking at the internal structure of phrases. We've found that phrases have heads and possibly modifiers. In this section we're going to start looking at the functions of the phrases themselves. So if you take a whole phrase, what job is it performing? Because we thread phrases together into larger structures. So at this point it's time to look upward, if you like, and see what sort of structures phrases themselves are functioning in. In other words, time to look at the functions of phrases. And we're going to start with the simplest division of phrases into two different functions. We're going to say that some phrases can be subjects and other phrases can be predicates when we string them together. And essentially that is asking the question, who's doing what? If we ask about this sentence, who's doing what, then the answer is the dogs are doing whatever's being done, and what is being done is playing in the park. So let's ask who or what's doing this. Well, the answer is some elephants are doing whatever's being done. And in this one the film crew are doing the leaving. And here Sandra's kind of doing something. It's a little more metaphorical. She's not liking the neighbours. And here we've got a sentence where the subject is the building, but nothing's actually being done. It is really that the building has a particular property. You'll see that there's a relationship here between the verb play and chew. The playing is being done by the dogs and the chewing is being done by the elephants. And even in E, what is looking? Well, the building is looking unstable. The journey up what might take 3 months? Well, the journey up the Nile. Those are subjects. Here they are. We ask who or what is performing the action of the verb or has the property denoted by the verb, and the answer is the dogs, some elephants, the film crew, Sandra, the building, and a journey up the Nile. And there's an agreement relationship. You remember we talked about agreement earlier. If the subject is a he, she, or it subject, and the verb is in the present tense, then you have to watch out. If the verb is singular, then you have to put an S on the end of the verb. And this is a kind of completely useless morpheme in some ways. It doesn't tell us anything because the rest of it we've already got. But it does signal the relationship between a subject and a verb. So the dogs, what did the dogs do? Remember, the dogs played in the park. Well, if we turn that into the present tense, the dogs play in the park. If we only have one dog, a dog plays in the park. We have to put that S on the end. It's an agreement relationship. Well, the predicate is everything that's left, and of course it's what the subject is doing or what particular property it has. Yes, the elephants, what were they doing? Were chewing the acacia trees, and so on, and so on, and so on. It's all the rest before you get to the full stop. Well, let's see how good you are at finding subjects, and I'm sure you're brilliant at it. Subject, Peter. What's he doing? Joining the predicate. Who's performing? The greatest magician of all time. Subject. Who or what escaped from the zoo? 3 monkeys. Not on Saturday morning. It's the 3 monkeys that escaped. So you might have been tempted earlier to think, oh, it's always the first phrase in the sentence. Not necessarily. You have to look at the verb and say, who is doing what? Who hates performing? They do. They are the subject. And the last one is kind of tricky, because here we've got 2 verbs. Well, let's start with interests. What interests the police? And the answer is that Lionel saw the escape. That interests them. Yep, that he saw the escape interests them. Well, that is not a phrase that we've dealt with previously, because inside of it there's another verb, saw. Who did the seeing? Lionel did. So he's the subject inside there, and saw the escape is the predicate. So we have, in fact, two kind of beasties of the sort that we've been looking at earlier. Something interests the police, and someone saw the escape, and one of these is buried inside the other. You remember we've seen that kind of embedding previously. Well, since we can now have one thing inside another, we have to look not just at sentences, but bits inside sentences that have the same structure as a sentence. And what we're going to call these is clauses. Again, this is probably somewhere hundreds of years old, calling it clauses. It's got nothing to do with Santa. Anything that has a subject and a predicate is a clause, and so we can have multi-clause sentences. Sentences that have a number of clauses, each of which has its own subject and its own predicate. And we'll look at that stacking arrangement, the embedding arrangement, a little later when we look at multi-clause sentences. So we found that subjects and predicates are quite easy to find, and one of the reasons for using the labeled bracketed notation that I looked at very briefly earlier is that you can put a bracket around a clause, and if that clause is inside another clause, you can put brackets around the whole clause, including the clause that's included inside the clause. And then you can say, well, we've got a clause inside a clause here, just as we can bracket phrases inside phrases. So, very simply, anything that has a subject and a predicate is a clause. Well, what about predicates? Predicates are lovely. Predicates always have the structure of a VP. Remember, we finished with VPs in the last session. Well, there is only one function that VPs perform, and that is predicate. And all predicates have the structure of a VP. That isn't the case for subjects. We've already seen that some subjects are noun phrases, if you look back a few slides, and we've also seen that some subjects are clauses. So predicates are really good. They behave themselves nicely. They're always VPs.